Hi boys and girls, today we're going to continue with Frindle by Andrew Clements, and today we're going to read chapter 11. If you remember, we left off on chapter 10 where Judy Morgan, the reporter, had interviewed Mrs. Chatham, the principal, Mrs. Granger, and a bunch of other kids, which included Nick, but she didn't know that it was Nick until the end. She figured out. And so today's chapter is called Extra, Extra, Read All About It. And this is an easy chapter to predict because it's called Extra, Extra, Read All About It. See? Have you ever heard, like maybe you heard it on a movie or you heard it somewhere, when people are selling a newspaper and they put up their newspaper and they go, Extra, Extra, Read All About It. Have you ever heard that? And so today's chapter is called that. It's called Extra, Extra, Read All About It, which tells me that the story about Frindle is out. It's out in the newspaper, in the local newspaper of Westfield, because that's where Nick lives. That's his city, right? The state is New Hampshire, but the city is Westfield. And so the title, it's very easy to predict. It's called Extra, Extra, Read All About It. And so we're going to see what happened and what came out on the newspaper. Today's chapter is also very short, but it's very good. It's a very good chapter. So let's go ahead and begin chapter 11. Extra, Extra, Read All About It. On Thursday morning, the Westfield Gazette was delivered to all 12,297 homes and post office boxes in Westfield. So that's a big number. That's a lot of people in this little town. 12,297 homes, plus the post office boxes. So those are extra boxes that they have in the post office too. So let's kind of round it off, maybe 12,500 probably, but that's still a lot of people. So the Westfield Gazette was delivered to all 12,297 homes and post office in Westfield. The story about Lincoln Elementary School was the first item on the front page and the headline. So it was on the front of the page. It wasn't in the middle of the page. It was the front page. That's why it was extra, extra. Read all about it. And the headline read this: Local fifth grader says, "Move over, Mr. Webster." That was the title. Local fifth grader says, "Move over, Mr. Webster." Now, Webster is a type of dictionary because there's different dictionaries with different names, but the main dictionary is called the Webster Dictionary. It was quite an article. Not that Judy Morgan didn't tell the truth. Every statement in the article was completely true. It was the particular way she told the truth that got things hopping around town. So remember, she was taking notes on chapter 10, and so she took good notes, and she has to tell the truth because remember, a reporter has to give only facts. But the way she wrote it was in a very creative way because remember, she's a writer, she's a reporter, so she's a creative writer. You can also be a creative writer, right? You can write in your own way, so you can be creative too. For example, take this sentence about Mrs. Granger. She wrote this: Mrs. Granger, champion of the forces of order and authority, is battling hundreds of young Frindle fighters. Neither side is giving in. You see, she makes it a very catchy sentence. She just doesn't make it boring. She adds good details, right? She wants to catch the reader's attention, and she wants the reader to be interested in what she's saying, right? And so remember, I always told you that when you're writing, you have to start with a question, or you can start with an action, boom, and things like that, right? So to catch the reader's attention, so the reader wants to read your story. And so this is what Judy, the reporter, is doing. She just didn't say, "Oh, Mrs. Granger, she's just a teacher at this Lincoln Elementary School." No, she says, Mrs. Granger, champion of the forces of order and authority, is battling hundreds of young Frindle fighters, and neither side is giving in. Remember, back to the battle and the war and all that stuff. Or this sentence about Nick, for example. She wrote this. Everyone agrees that Nick Allen masterminded this plot that cleverly raises issues about free speech and academic rules. He is the boy who invented the new word. Again, she's saying the facts, but she's making it very juicy, very interesting. She's not making that sentence boring, because if she would have just said, well, the teacher's Mrs. Granger, and she's fighting against the boy, and his name is Nick Allen, that's kind of boring to read in a newspaper. She's a reporter. She's creative, and she knows what to say, how to catch the reader's attention. It makes the reader want to read more. Or how about this last sentence in the article? One thing is sure, the kids at Lincoln Elementary School love their Frindles, and no one seems to be backing off this war of words. Here it goes again. Remember, we've been talking about all of this throughout the chapters. It's a battle, it's a war, it's a game of chess, right? And even Judy has been able to figure that out, okay? And of course, the Westfield Gazette published a class picture too. And Mrs. Granger and Nick were identified for all the world to see. I bet you that they kind of did like a little circle. Here's the boy, Nick Allen, and here's the teacher, Mrs. Granger. What is the meaning of this? That is what Nick's mother said, putting the article in front of Nick's nose when he got home from school. Did you talk to this reporter? She seems to know an awful lot about you and your new word, young man. You see, this time, it seems like Nick's mom is not really on his side anymore. Remember at first, Nick felt like mom was like, yay, mom, right? And she was the queen. But it seems like for this time, she saw the newspaper and she's like, what is the meaning of this? That's what Nick's mother said, putting the article in front of Nick's nose. But then look what happens next. What is the meaning of this? That's what the school superintendent said to Mrs. Chatham, slapping a copy of the article into her desk. Why did you have to talk to that reporter? Don't we have enough trouble getting the taxpayers to pay for our schools without articles like this banging around town? See, same thing. What is the meaning of this? Nick's mom said, what is the meaning of this? To Nick. And then the superintendent says the same thing to Mrs. Chatham. He's like, what is the meaning of this? And check this last one out. What is the meaning of this? That's what Mrs. Chatham said to Mrs. Granger, shaking the newspaper in front of her face. You see, all three are wondering and asking the same thing, like, what is the meaning of this? So first Nick, right? Nick's mom, because that's his mom, and she's like, what is the meaning of this? And then to Mrs. Chatham, the superintendent, because that's her boss, and he's like, what is the meaning of this? And then to Mrs. Granger, Mrs. Chatham, the principal, is her boss, and she's like, what is the meaning of this? You see, three different ways. Well, same thing, right? What is the meaning of this? But the boss of each one, right? And so they're like, wait, how come all of this came out in the newspaper? But remember, it's the way that Judy wrote it that makes them all say, like, what is the meaning of this? What's going on here? What's interesting is at the end, when Mrs. Chapman says this to Mrs. Granger, she says, what is the meaning of this? That's what Mrs. Chatham said to Mrs. Granger, shaking the newspaper in front of her face. I know you had to talk to that woman, but did you have to say all these things? I wonder if we don't all get fired. See, Mrs. Chatham said, because whatever you said and whatever I said, we might even get fired. It was quite a Thursday for everyone, and no one could figure out how Judy Morgan had gotten the 5th grade class picture. And so, that's actually the end of this chapter. Remember, I told you that this chapter was very short, and so this is the end of chapter 11. And so, the last sentence says, it was quite a Thursday for everyone, because everybody was reading the newspaper, and especially Mrs. Chatham, Nick's mom, Mrs. Granger, and everybody got kind of scolded by saying, "What is the meaning of this?" Right? And so the author leaves us with the kind of like the question that says, no one could figure out how Judy Morgan had gotten the 5th grade class picture. Do you have an idea how she might have gotten that picture? I have some thoughts and some ideas. I'm thinking that maybe it was Nick and his friends, right? Maybe they went and they just kind of gave her the pictures. And so, again, that's the end of this chapter. And just want to kind of, since this is a short chapter, I want to kind of remind you or kind of tell you that this book has 15 chapters. And so right now I just finished reading chapter 11. So we have chapter 12, chapter 13, chapter 14, and chapter 15, which is our last chapter to read. And so I hope you're enjoying the book so far. And so now that the word Frindle is out on the newspaper, and it was out to all the homes, the 12,297 homes, I'm wondering what's gonna happen next. Is this gonna be the end of the word Frindle? Is it gonna become, are people gonna know it more now? Is it gonna fade away like Mrs. Granger predicted? So I want you to kind of think about all these ideas, okay? And so that's the end, and I will see you next time. Bye, boys and girls.